In 2010, the hit TV show Pretty Little Liars started airing. Season 1 came out and it completely overtook a generation. I would say my generation and a little bit older, most people, especially girls, were watching this show. Now, I don't need to tell you how problematic we have sort of dissected it to be over the last few years, especially. I've seen multiple video essays done on it, and it really got me thinking, how bad is the source material for this show? So I decided to read the first book. And when I tell you that this book is targeted towards 12 and 13-year-olds, and the contents are very similar to the show, I I don't know how we ever thought it was okay to be giving children this kind of content. The first book came out in 2006. I'm sure the version that I read a couple days ago was probably edited a little bit since then. However, the contents and the themes throughout are, to my opinion, and bear in mind, obviously, I'm not a mother, but I personally believe that most of the content of that book should not be accessible to 12 and 13-year-olds. Some of the themes explored in this book, which again, I repeat, is targeted at 12 and 13-year-olds, specifically girls, is grooming, inappropriate power dynamics. There's this obsession around weight and being petite, and even eating disorder discussions. And it's not necessarily that those things are bad to include in media. I think there's very much a place for those in media, and at the end I might talk about a couple of places where I think it did it quite well. My issue is with the representation being so normalized, and it when you read it, it's just like, yeah, this is what the lives of 15-year-olds are like. And do you know how harmful that is to perpetuate to 12 and 13-year-olds? The normalization of a teacher-student relationship, the normalization of flirting with your older sister's boyfriend, and more importantly, that boyfriend flirting back with an age difference of like 5 or 6 years. It's diabolical. But anyway, I think I've rambled an intro enough. I will break it down into rough sections. We will talk about the grooming and the power dynamics, and we will talk about the eating disorders, and then I will talk about Emily in her own separate little box. So for those of you who don't actually know what the show is about, let me very briefly summarise. There's this one night at the very end of 7th grade, for those of you who are UK or elsewhere, that is sort of like 12, 13 years old. There's one night at the end of 7th grade where these 5 girls have a sleepover. During the sleepover, there's a little bit of confrontation between them, and then one of the girls leaves the building that they're in and she goes missing. Then we jump to 3-4 years later at the very start of 11th grade, and this story is all about these girls going through their lives at the start of the school year, but they start getting these mysterious texts from a person called A. Now, this person knows the deepest, darkest secrets of every single one of them, things that only Ali knew, Ali being the girl who disappeared 3 years ago and still has not been found. So this story is about the 4 remaining girls and their lives, trying to work out who is maybe responsible for sending these texts and threatening to spill their secrets to the people of Rosewood, which is the town that they live in. So that's generally what it is about. I won't be talking too much about the plot in terms of breaking it down, this happens, then this happens, and that happens. I'm not interested really in talking about that. I'm more interested in picking out little bits and pieces that happen throughout to establish just how diabolical this piece of literature is. I'm going to jump into the subject matter that I think most of you will have clicked this video for, and that is the grooming, the casualized power dynamic relationships, just absolutely glazing over age differences for young people. Now, I am going to talk about Spencer first, and then I think we will talk about Aria. So who is Spencer? Spencer is a girl who feels a tremendous amount of pressure to be absolutely perfect. Her sister is 5 or 6 years older. I think in the show maybe she's 6 or 7 years older, but we'll go with 6 years. No, maybe, okay, no. We'll go with 5 years, because that will be the best of the inappropriate age gaps. So let's say she's 5 years older. Spencer's older sister has already gone through everything that Spencer's currently going through, but Melissa is perfect. She gets incredible grades, and Spencer really strives to beat her to get validation from her parents. That validation is not forthcoming, and Spencer really feels like she has to try to stick out, and I feel so bad for her. If we exclude the fact that they're all kind of bullies, if we just leave that aside for a moment, I do feel bad for her. She is absolutely trying her best, and she just can't step out of her sister's shadow. That being said, the subject matter that this mystery texter A is communicating with Spencer about is the fact that Spencer keeps kissing her older sister's boyfriends. Is that crazy? Yes. It is genuinely crazy to be kissing a relative's partner, full stop. However, what is even more crazy is to be kissing your girlfriend's little sister. And it feels like that part is just glazed over in the books. In the books, when the family finds out that Spencer has kissed Melissa's boyfriend, Melissa being the older sister, they have a tremendous go at Spencer. And do I think that's valid? Yes. But at no point is there any actual conversation about the fact that Melissa's boyfriend was kissing Spencer to begin with. In 11th grade, students are 16 to 17 years old. So we will assume that all of these girls are currently 16 because we're right at the start of 11th grade. So assuming that she's 16 years old and Melissa's boyfriend is probably going to be 5 or 6 years older than her, this boyfriend at this time that the main story is happening is 21 or 22 years old. He is 21 or 22 years old, flirting with a 16-year-old, kissing a 16-year-old. It does not matter that Spencer is flirting back. It does not matter that Spencer is encouraging it, because it is his responsibility as the adult to not try and take advantage of a 16-year-old. Really not that difficult. It shouldn't even be in the realm of possibilities in your mind. You should just go, that's my girlfriend's little sister. Nice to meet you. You can be friendly. You can help them. The scene where everything starts to go wrong for them is when Spencer does some kind of sport. I want to say it's something like hockey. Let's say it's hockey. So Spencer does hockey and her muscles are all kind of cramped up. Now, Melissa's boyfriend, Ren, he is a trainee doctor. I think he might be in like his first year of residency or first year of med school. He's in his first year of something medically related. He walks in on Spencer in the bathroom trying to like get this cream into her hamstrings or something, and he's like, do you want me to do it? What do you mean? What do you mean? She's 16. I don't care if you are a medical professional. You do not go up to a 16-year-old alone in a bathroom and offer to rub cream on their hamstrings. Maybe if you were like a long-term partner of someone in the family and this had happened before and you know that the family's okay with this, but that's kind of crazy in my opinion. And then later on in the book, Ren comes up to the place that Spencer is staying. She's staying out in the barn, out in the garden, and well, it's like a converted barn. They don't have her in with like horses and stuff. But yeah, Ren goes up to her in the barn. She gives like this little tour. She dressed up a little bit because she was kind of hoping he would stop by. But again, it is not her responsibility to stop this sort of interaction from happening. It's fully on the adult. And then Ren's all like, oh, remember the bathroom? I kind of wish I saw you like that again. Excuse me? To your girlfriend's little sister. So yeah, anyway, that is the crazy Well, that's the modern day crazy part of Spencer's story. I would like to point out one more thing that was happening in the past. Back in the 7th grade, Ali, the girl who went missing, and Spencer had a competition to see how many older boys they could kiss. That was just a thing that they had. For no apparent reason, maybe we don't encourage 12-year-olds to try and kiss as many older boys as they can. Maybe we encourage 12-year-olds to engage in romantic and early love in a respectful and appropriate manner. We don't encourage that kind of behavior. I remember girls in my school talking about older relationships or dating someone in uni or like hanging out with sixth form boys. And at that time, I've always been a little bit. I was a nerd at school, so I was one of those like goody two shoes people. And at that time, with the knowledge that I had then, I was a bit like, okay, that's a little bit odd, but I didn't think of it beyond that. And that was when I was like 15 or 16. I don't think you can expect 12 and 13-year-olds to be able to look at that content and go, that's not okay. It's not their job to look at that content and go, that's not okay. A 16-year-old and a 22-year-old should not be kissing, and it is the 22-year-old's fault, primarily. But anyway, yeah, as part of that competition that Ali and Spencer had when they were in 7th grade and when they were 12 and 13 years old, Spencer did end up kissing her older sister's boyfriend of that time as well. But again, I want to make this even more clear that at that time she would have been 12 or 13 years old, and at the time the boyfriend that she was kissing would have been anywhere between 16 and 18 years old. I can't imagine looking at a 12-year-old and going, yes. And it's just so glossed over. It's just a fact in the book, and I just find that so crazy that it's just there, that it happened, and it's barely ever mentioned again. And like, that's not okay. That's not okay. So that's the main stuff in Spencer's case. It's very much older boy, younger girl dynamic, but it's not really that. It's more like fully grown adult and child dynamic that is just should not be acceptable, things that we would absolutely raise our eyebrows about. To push that further, we have Aria and Ezra's storyline, which is about a 16-year-old and her. I don't know exactly how old he is. I would say he's probably 23, 24-year-old. Yeah, so it's about a 16-year-old and her 23, 24-year-old English teacher. Before we get onto that specific storyline, there is one other thing in Aria's background that I think is just a little bit weird because it was just thrown in as a fun fact. So just before Ali goes missing, Aria's found out that her father is cheating on her mum. She doesn't tell her mum, she kind of keeps that a secret, and that's one of the things that this mystery A in the future is holding over her. But something happens, not necessarily to do with that relationship. I don't think the mum knows even by the end of the first book. Aria ends up moving to Iceland. Pretty sure it's Iceland. And while she's there, it is mentioned that shortly after she moves, she ends up meeting the 17-year-old and kissing him. Shortly after she moves, she's 13, maybe 14, and she's kissing a 17-year-old. I also don't think that's okay. But again, that is like so the least of her problems in this book. I could talk about Aria and Ezra in this book for like 46 minutes, but I'm hoping to keep this much shorter than that, mostly because I have arm muscle problems and I struggle with editing. So I need to keep it shorter than that. Let's start with how Ezra and Aria meet. Now, I will not be looking at this from the perspective of what I know happens in the show. So in the show, near the end of the show, meaning you should skip like 30 seconds if you don't want to know what happens at the end of the show. By the end of the show, it is found out that Ezra knew who these girls were from the very beginning. He was going to write a book about Ali, the missing girl, and so he specifically targeted finding Aria at that bar. In the book, we don't know that yet, so I'm going to put aside that information because I haven't read the rest of the books. I don't know if that's a show thing or a book thing. I'm going to look at this book purely as this is all the information that I have. Where did my sunlight go? Okay, I guess we're doing a gloomy video for the rest of this then. Anyway, Ezra and Aria meet because Aria goes to a bar type place. She asks for a drink. The bartender gives her a little bit of a look, but gives her a drink anyway. And just down the bar is Ezra. Now, Ezra assumes that Aria is a student, as in a university student, 19, 20, that sort of age. Aria allows this and encourages this misunderstanding. Now, is that bad that she did that? Yes. But again, whose responsibility is it to make sure everything's okay? The adult. She is not an adult. So if we kind of have to suspend disbelief here for a moment. And if we assume that Ezra is looking at Aria and genuinely thinks that she's a little bit older, because some people do look a little bit older than their age, assumes that she is like 18, 19, 20, then what happens next? I think it's a little bit of a grey area, but I think it's forgivable because if he genuinely believes that she is the age that she's like portraying to be, like you don't go checking IDs if you genuinely believe someone's the age that they're saying they are. They end up making out in a bathroom after connecting over their love of English. They make out in a bathroom. End scene. That's what happens there. Now, I have some quotes over what happens next. So during their conversation at the bar, Aria finds out that he is an English teacher and he's freshly graduated, he's come here for a job. Aria, the next day, or whenever, goes into her new English class. And you'll never guess who's there. Oh yes, it's Ezra. Ezra turns around and goes, "Holy shit," and he's looking dead at her. And amusingly, across the other room, Hanna, a girl that we haven't gotten to yet, who is one of the main four, she's like, "Yo, did you sleep with your teacher?" Kind of a crazy first guess, but it was a little bit funny. You got to look through the inappropriateness, and that's a little bit funny. So he's trying to cover up his reaction to seeing Aria in the classroom because he can hardly go, "Yeah, we were making out the other day," because he's a teacher and she's a student and she's clearly not over 18. She's clearly like 16 years old. He said to the class, again, and I quote, "I was afraid that a bee had flown into my pants and I thought the bee was going to sting me, and so I yelled out in terror." You thought a bee was in your pants? That is the stupid excuse I have ever heard. It was awful. But what makes it even worse is that Aria, upon hearing that, in her head, she thinks she was the bee that had flown into his pants. Come on now, can we treat this with a little bit more gravity than, I don't know, bee humor? What is going on? When I see clips of the show, there's always like this Ezra chickpea meme, and I feel like the book version of this is an Ezra bee meme. I don't know whether chickpeas are in later books, but this bee moment really stuck with me. I made a TikTok about it the other day, and I just So after this, like the next day or something, Aria ends up going to his office or classroom or whatever when no one else is around, and they have a little conversation which basically ends with, "We can't continue this." And they're both kind of like, "What a shame. This is a shame." But they're like, "This is not appropriate. We cannot continue it." And I think up to that point, kind of forgivable. If they genuinely stuck to that, that's horrible and gross, and I find it hard to believe that you couldn't see a 16-year-old girl and you saw like an 18, 19, 20-year-old. But if that's the case, all right, let's just move on from it. No. So Aria now spends as much time as she can trying to make him jealous by using this poor guy Noel. And then a few diabolical things happen after that. For one, Ezra is like leaning over her on a desk. You know, that sexy thing that happens with teachers. I shuddered even saying that. But he's like leaning over her desk, helping her or whatever, and she slides her pinky finger over to touch his, to see if he's gonna like move it away, and he doesn't. And then she puts her pinky finger in her mouth. Crazy. She announces that she's gonna go to this party, hoping that he will overhear. She also like kisses Noel on the cheek to try and make him jealous. But anyway, she decides she's gonna go to this party. And while she's at the party, she does think, I'm such an idiot. Like, what's a teacher going to do? The teacher isn't going to turn up to a 16, 17-year-old party. If you can think that far, why can't you think that a teacher is not going to date you? And more importantly, shouldn't be dating you. But this is a book where we romanticize, I don't know, grooming and inappropriate relationships. Her phone rings and she realizes it's Ezra. She picks up and he says, I'm at home having a scotch, thinking about you. You are 23 or 24 years old. What are you doing thinking about a 16-year-old? I'm 24, wouldn't catch me dead thinking about a 16-year-old. Wouldn't catch me dead thinking about like a 20-year-old. It's just, there's so much maturity difference as you go up the years that is crazy. A, it's illegal, and B, it's stupid. Okay, I did say it was illegal. I actually don't know what the laws are for this state. So it might be more that it's a grey area, should be illegal. I know that in some places, some countries, some states, some whatevers, it's the like age of consent does raise depending on if there's like a power dynamic or a sense of responsibility, for example, with teachers. So it might be that the age of consent is 16, but in the case of power dynamics or power exchanges or whatever, it's 18 or 21. So I did say it was illegal. I don't know whether it genuinely is. I'm much more familiar with UK consent laws, as I'm from the UK. Regardless of whether it is or isn't illegal, a 24-year-old teacher being with a 16-year-old student should 100% be illegal. That, it just should be. So, Aria ends up going over to Ezra's because he's like, come on over. And they end up not quite having intercourse, but they do a lot of making out. Gross. And to be honest, not much is really spoken about that. I don't know, whether it's like a few days or something that they're actually together. I don't think they go anywhere. I don't think they do anything. I think occasionally maybe occasionally she goes over, but I'm honestly not sure. It might be that that's the one time that she goes over before this next time that I'm about to talk about. I think it might be that. I think it's the only time. So she leaves for whatever reason. Not for whatever reason. She leaves because she gets a message from A being all like, you really going for that extra credit? And she's like, oh my god, there's no one here who's sending me these messages. So she leaves. Turns out she's left her phone behind. So whenever she realizes that, maybe it's that evening, maybe it's a night or two down. So she ends up going back to his to try and get her phone. He opens the door. He's all like cold and unfeeling. And at first when I read it, I was like, oh, is there someone else in the flat? Because he's all like, what are you doing here? But no. So he read the messages on Aria's phone because the phone kept going off, or at least he said the phone kept going off, and the only way to stop it was to open the messages or something like that. So he thinks that she has been telling people that they've been together because he was reading all that stuff about extra credit, and believes that A, she's spreading the information that he's sleeping with a student or almost sleeping with a student, or that she is just doing this to get good grades. So here are some things that I highlighted that he did or said. Ezra slapped his palm against the wall. The force of it made Aria jump. Don't play dumb. I'm not some boy, Aria. Which, A, if she's jumpy, he's smacking things. This is clear abuse signs. This is like early flag abuse signs. If abuse is something that you don't really want to listen to, I would skip on to the next section because the rest of the scene does actually increase in severity. Again, everything's time-stamped. If you don't want to hear about any more physical violence, move on. It's not gratuitous violence, but it is still violence. I understand that can be triggering for some people. So please, if you don't want to hear any more, skip ahead. I think the additional thing about that sentence is this: don't play dumb, I'm not some boy, Aria. No, you're not a boy, you're a grown-ass man who's trying to get with a 16-year-old. She is some girl. She's going to react in weird and crazy ways because she is innately immature. And it's just that I'm not some boy. Like, you should be a boy. She should be dating a boy. So anyway, ugh. So he's like slapping things, she's scared, and this next bit also happens. Ezra clapped his hand over her mouth. Please, he said a little desperately, please leave. Aria widened her eyes and her heart started to pound. Alarm bells went off in her head. This felt wrong. On impulse, she bit down into Ezra's hand. So he's like physically stopping her from saying anything. He's like clapped against her mouth, telling her to leave. And so she bites him because get off me. So that, obviously, that is violent. But if you've got a grown man who has just scared you by slapping the wall and is yelling at you for things that genuinely aren't your fault, because A, it's his responsibility that, like, to stop you guys from have even, what am I saying? It was his responsibility to stop them from getting to this point. And also, she didn't say those things. Those are genuinely just text messages on her phone. And I understand that that can be a miscommunication, that that's really easy to misconstrue. But it's his job to be the adult about things. It's his job to not be seeing her full stop. So she bites him, and then he's still yelling at her to leave. And then as she's starting to leave, this is what happens. As her hand turned the doorknob, something screamed past her, bouncing off the wall and landed next to her foot. It was a copy of Being a Nothingness by Jean-Paul Sartre. Jean-Paul Sartre. Aria turned back to Ezra, her mouth open in shock. Get out, Ezra boomed. So he throws something at her. And I actually don't know what Being a Nothingness is about, but it would be quite clever if that was actually, if referencing that book and that book being the one that was thrown meant something. I don't know what that book's about. I have not included that as part of my research. So if you know that it is some sort of reference to something, please let me know. He's yelling at her, throwing stuff at her, physically stopping her from talking, smacking things, scaring her. So not only is he a groomer, he is also very clearly an abusive man. So I can only imagine how much worse it gets throughout the rest of the books. And again, this is just, I mean, clearly Aria's scared, but I just don't think that an abusive, toxic relationship with your teacher is something that 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds should be exposed to. I don't think that's appropriate. I feel like maybe as you get to like 15 and 16, I don't know, it's really hard to say when this stuff should be allowed in media, but I think unless unless there's a genuine reason for it, unless it's a commentary on it happening and it's an important part of their story, I just don't see the use in putting it in books for kids. I just don't think that it's something that needs to happen. So checking my notes, I think that's pretty much all I had to cover as part of the section I called casual grooming. Yeah, I just don't understand why it's even a thing, really. I would say that the last point in my casual grooming segment does actually come from the next Pretty Little Liar that I'll be talking about, Hannah, because Hannah thinks, and again, this was the first thing I highlighted because I was just so horrified by it that it actually made me highlight it. I was like, I have to talk to someone about this. Hanna thinks, the exact quote, "Besides, Lolita looked deliciously dirty." Lolita, and this is a difficult thing because it is the perspective of a 15, 16-year-old girl. But no, let's not even perpetrate or pretend that Lolita is deliciously dirty. That sentence probably would have made more sense if it was coming from Aria and Aria's story, because then there would be a legitimate place for it. They're like, clearly she has romanticized the idea of teacher-student or like power dynamic or older man relationships. She romanticized that. But in Hannah's story, it's just put in there for a bit of fun, which I found kind of crazy. There's definitely places where you can have like a younger person reference Lolita being like good or incredible, even though that's very clearly not why it's been written. I have not read Lolita. I've considered reading it a couple of times because I read My Dark Vanessa and I thought this book was really, really good. I will talk about it a little bit more in the conclusion. But for example, in this book, the student in it who's being groomed, she does read Lolita. It's encouraged by her groomer to read Lolita, and she thinks it's a beautiful story. She romanticizes it. But that's a part of her journey, that's a part of her story. And this is very much a commentary on the dangers of grooming. Again, I will talk about this later, but this, to me, is a story about grooming done right. And this is just a story with casual grooming in it. Okay, end of the grooming talk for now. I'm sick of talking about disgusting people. Now, I will be talking about eating disorders. If that does not interest you, please leave the video or skip to the last couple sections. There is one girl in the 4 remaining girls, Hannah. Now, her story is very much about her trying to break out of being the dorky girl that she was when she was 12. She was dorky, she was chubby, and the reason why she was chubby was because she stress eats. She eats when she starts eating more when her parents start splitting up. So she starts eating more, and she does get bullied and poked fun at a little bit by the other girls in that group back in 7th grade, which is heartbreaking because she's going through a lot. And Hannah's thing that A is always talking to her about is normally her eating disorder. And I believe, no, I'm not going to try and diagnose because I don't know exactly what she has. I think I know, but I don't know enough about eating disorders to say for sure. She is depicted multiple times binge eating, and the thing that Ali saw her do back in 7th grade was she used the toothbrush of her dad's like new daughter-in-law. She used that toothbrush to make herself be sick. She made herself sick because her dad made a joke about her being a little piggy, and I don't think it was meant maliciously from the father's perspective. I think he was just a moron. So we definitely do hold him accountable for kind of like being that last push into making Hannah start this destructive behaviour. But it felt more like it was supposed to be affection, but it's just, don't ever call your kid a little piggy. Don't call anyone a little piggy. That's just common sense. But anyway, this moron father made a little a little affectionate-ish jab at her, and then she started throwing up. So that's kind of what her story is it's a mix of her stealing things, her becoming the cool version of herself that she thought she should be, and her battling with this additional stress of messaging her, and the additional stress of maybe being caught for the stealing by binge eating and this fixation on her weight. Is she ever weighing herself? No, I don't think any of them actually weigh themselves or talk about specific numbers. However, there is a common theme where they talk about small jeans and small clothing and small dresses, and they constantly reference being like a size 2, which again, I'm not too familiar with the UK versus US sizings, but I'm pretty sure the only other size in the US is maybe a size 0. So size 2 is very petite, to my knowledge. Now, I don't think that this was... I think if you're going to do something like that for people so young, it needs to be a story about someone getting better from it. Someone, or maybe someone starting to do that and then immediately being told to stop. It needs to be a very, very clear message and that's if you should even portray it at all to 12 and 13-year-olds. I personally wouldn't. I think it's an important discussion to have, but at what point you choose to do that as a parent is up to you. Yeah, so it's just... it felt like there was something missing there, that it was just there, and it just made me feel a little bit uncomfortable that it was even so consistent, because you can definitely have struggles, but I feel like that's the sort of plot line in a book that maybe should be for people who are a little bit older than 12 and 13. So not, in my opinion, the worst thing in the book, but still a very destructive behaviour to inform 12-year-olds that it's a possibility, this is a thing you can do, whereas it doesn't really say this is a thing that you should not do. Because if you take it at face value, what it says is chubby girl starts throwing up after she eats. 3 years later, she's skinny and popular. And that's so harmful. That's insanely harmful when you break it down to that level. Yes, she's a little bit sad, and yes, she's struggling a little bit, but I think you need to be older to really read into that. At face value, she goes from chubby to skinny because she throws up. And that's... oh, it would break my heart. And there must be girls that read this book growing up that turned to that or considered it because of this book, and that breaks my heart. I really, really hope that never happened, but realistically, I don't know. Obviously, I don't know anyone for sure who thought that, but if you idolize these girls, who are not nice girls, but whatever, if you idolize these girls, you want to be skinny like them, you want to be pretty like them, you want to be perfect like them. That just makes me really upset to think about. I don't have any quotes for this part, but I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about the fourth and final girl that this main story is about, and that's Emily. I believe Emily had maybe the only story that I would genuinely be okay with a 12 or 13-year-old reading. Emily's story is all about trying to find herself beyond her parents' expectations and dealing with her sexuality. Now, I know that stuff to do with sexuality can very much be a controversial topic nowadays, as to how old people should be taught about sexuality and whatever. But I believe that there is no age too young to start teaching your children about respect. And that means being able to read a book with some sexuality discussed in it and either just feel neutral about it. I think neutrality is probably a really good angle. You're reading a story about this, and this is what this is about. That's fine. So, Emily, is she a perfect girl? Absolutely not. She does technically cheat on her boyfriend, and she does not treat him very well. She should have just broken up with him. But I don't think, again, in the grand scheme of what this is, that's that bad. I think messy characters should be allowed in younger people's books too. But yeah, the key part of her story is that she meets the girl who's now moved into Ali's old house, Maya, and she's starting to realize that maybe she has feelings for Maya. And this is reflected in the messages that A starts sending her, because it turns out at the end of 7th grade, before Ali goes missing, Emily kisses Ali and sends her a letter basically being like, I understand if you don't feel this way, but I think I love you and I have to tell you that. And so exploring how Emily's like coming to terms with the fact that maybe she likes girls, or maybe she likes girls and boys. We don't really know at the close of this book where she stands. I think she's still trying to develop it herself. She's just very much a 16-year-old girl trying to find herself, making some poor decisions along the way. And I think one other really interesting piece was that it turns out that her family were against her being friends with Maya because Maya's black. And that's a problematic thing that I thought was handled fine or interesting in the book, because it's clear from Emily's perspective that she's like, I can't believe my parents thought that. Like, that's so wrong. It could have been more obvious that that was wrong, especially for 12 and 13-year-olds, but I think that was implied. So overall, and I might be wrong, if you think I'm wrong, please let me know, maybe I've forgotten something. Overall, Emily's story is the most appropriate for 12 and 13-year-olds. So that, I think, is the end of my general ramble, which is good because I am losing my voice by the end of this video. I don't know how long I've been recording for. It feels like it's gone quite quickly, but maybe it's like 45 minutes or something. I'm not sure. I think really what I wanted to say off the end of this is I don't know whether I'm going to read the rest of the books. A part of me wants to see just how bad it gets and maybe post a secondary update to this video. The other thing that I briefly touched on is that there's definitely a space for conversations of this nature. I just think it should be for older people. I mentioned earlier that I thought the book My Dark Vanessa was really good, and I've seen a few other book talkers talk about it and say that it is really good. It's such a powerful piece. It's talking about how it's between flashbacks of like the present and the past, and it's this woman sort of starting to come to terms with maybe she had been groomed, and she's very much in denial. And then it flicks back to the past where you can see the interactions between her when she's 16 years old. She's 16? No, 15, when she's 15 years old, and her teacher. And you can so clearly see his manipulation. It's so obviously not romanticized. You spend the whole time going, oh, it's so. I just, there are so few words I have to explain it, but this is a good representation, in my opinion, because it is not romanticized at all. And it's about the victim. But again, would I recommend this to a kid? No, because maybe they don't see the nuance of it. This is very much a book for adults. I think I read it last year, so I would have been I think I was 23 when I read that. Likewise, there is a movie that this sort of made me think of that I think I watched when I was 14 or 15. Actually, it came out in 2017. It came out in 2017, so I must have been 15 or 16. And that's To the Bone, which is a movie with Lily Collins in, and it's about this group of people who have eating disorders and they're getting help. And it's all about that sense of community and friendship and hope and recovery. And maybe I'm misremembering it because it has been 10 years since I watched that movie, and I was watching it with a younger mind and a younger perspective. So maybe there are problematic things in that movie. I probably should have watched it again before I was like, this was a good representation. But in my memory, like, that didn't cause any problems or make me consider eating disorders or anything. That was just, it was all about surviving and overcoming, which is a really beautiful message to put out there. So I think it's all about the reflection, because this book was about looking back and understanding and unpacking, or starting to unpack. I think she's very strongly in denial, and then the survival and the overcoming. It's all about coming out the other side of your trauma and learning to live with the trauma. yeah, I don't know. There's definitely places where it can be discussed, but I think 12 and 13-year-olds, they don't need to be a part of that really. So yeah, let me know if you want me to watch the TV show and give you my opinions on that first season, because I think the first season and the first book map up pretty well. And then additionally, there's one other video I'm considering doing, and that is about the discourse I've seen online surrounding the Haunting Adeline movie adaptation. I have not read the book, but I have now seen multiple YouTube commentary channels talking about this happening, and what they're doing is just regurgitating information they have seen online. They have not read the book, so I am considering reading the book and giving my opinions on whether I think that sort of media should be created, and what the harms of it would be, and everything like that, because it is bordering on censorship. But I haven't read the book. I don't know how bad it gets. I have read dark romance books. I do like reading dark romance, but I have my own lines and my own boundaries where I'm like, I don't think this is okay anymore. And I think this book either teeters or falls into that this isn't okay anymore category. So I'm considering reading it and giving my opinion on that matter. Again, if that's something that would interest you, let me know. And I will see you in the next one with my voice back functioning, hopefully. Thank you and goodbye.